等到你们了。
上当了！快跑，快跑！
出什么事了？有几个小贼想要杀那个人灭口，急，你留下来，以防万一。
Hello everybody and welcome to this video looking at Sword and Fairy 6. This is a new JRPG on PlayStation 4. It has been kicking around on PC for quite a while, but East Asia Soft, the boutique publisher of shmups and JRPGs and things, saw some kind of potential, I guess, in it as a console title and decided to also bring it to console for the first time. And I'm quite glad they did. The most distinctive thing about this game is that it comes from China. And while it is in every way a Japanese RPG in the sense that it's very heavily inspired by Final Fantasy XIII's combat system, it has dialogue trees that work a bit like the Tales of series, and there's elements in there of just about every popular JRPG you can imagine. Despite all of that, it has a very unique Chinese aesthetic and sensibility to it, which makes it quite original and interesting for somebody who has played a lot of JRPGs like I have. Now, I'm not saying that this game is perfect by any means. It is very B-grade in terms of its production values, and it has a lot of issues, some of which I'll mention in this video. Plenty of others are quite evident if you're just watching the video along. And then anything that I don't get to in the course of this video, I'll talk about in my review on digitallydownloaded.net. But I was more than capable of looking past all of those issues to just really get stuck into the story, because I found the characters, the narrative, the setting, the world building, all of that stuff is really, really compelling. And I understand now, having played it, and at first being quite put off by how B-grade it is, at first I didn't quite understand why this is such a major series in China, and it is a really major series in China. It has a TV series that was based on it, and it is 6 titles in. That's why it's Sword and Fairy 6. They are actually up to the 6th title. And I understand now why it is so compelling, because it really is a very, very strong example of how to do storytelling and world building within the JRPG kind of context. So one of the things that I really love about this game is how exotic it feels. And it's exotic because you have to remember that China is an absolutely massive country with an absolutely ancient history, and within that there's an awful lot of cultures and storytelling traditions. And if you want to do a China in a video game and you want to kind of represent that kind of aesthetic, you need to take into account all of those environments and those cultures and those storytelling traditions, which this game really does really well at, actually. So for example, one of the things that people often forget about 1001 Arabian Nights is that a lot of its stories were set in China. People associate 1001 Arabian Nights with Arabia. It's right there in the title. But yes, a lot of the characters and a lot of the settings and a lot of the aesthetic that you read into that book actually comes from China. And you can see here there's a character that is dressed out very much in a kind of 1001 Arabian Nights style costume, and there are a lot of musical elements through the game which are you'd be comfortable putting into an 1001 Arabian Nights game as well. So that's just one example. Another example, and this kind of great sense of contrasting exotic elements, is that this scene is taking place in a village which is built of kind of yurts, which are the Mongolian huts. So Mongolia being another culture that has had a long association with China, and parts of Mongolian culture are within China today. And you know, they've had that long history of warfare, and even though Mongolia is an independent state now, there's Inner Mongolia inside China and all of that kind of stuff. So Mongolia is another culture that has had a big influence on Chinese storytelling. And these things all come together in this really appealing, exotic way. And it makes going to every new area within the game really interesting and exciting. Even though the game itself is not the most glamorous looking game out there, the art direction and the music, the use of music, is always appropriate. And it just makes that sense of discovery and wonder as you go through the world really, really different and unique and original, which is exactly what you want from a JRPG. You know, I've played so many JRPGs now, I didn't think that there was that much that could surprise me with them. But this one has definitely surprised me in a lot of ways. Now, as I said at the start of the video, a lot of the elements of this game are cribbed from other Japanese RPGs. The combat system's almost directly taken from Final Fantasy XIII, where there's a little bar that fills up, and while it's filling up you can give your character a couple of different actions, with different actions taking up more time to execute. So the more powerful actions you can do less frequently and all that kind of stuff. If you played Final Fantasy XIII, and I imagine most people who would watch this video would know Final Fantasy XIII fairly well, you'll know that what basically you could expect going into this one. Similarly, the sphere system here, which is how you improve the statistics of your characters. In addition to them getting more powerful as they level up, you can also customize them a bit this way. This is also very Final Fantasy feeling, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the mechanics, it's a very familiar kind of game. But yeah, it's I guess the problem with this game is it doesn't particularly do any of those mechanics very well. So I think part of the problem is that in the West here, we're quite used to games being quite literal, in the sense of you press a button and if an attack hits an opponent, that opponent will take damage and they'll respond in some way to having been hit. We're just used to that kind of tactile feedback to our actions in game. Whereas I feel like in China, they're probably more used to the MMO style of gameplay, where it's very abstracted and you press buttons and your character will be performing actions, but really that's just a visual layer over the top, and there's all kinds of data being crunched behind the scenes, which isn't necessarily fed back through the engine. So Sword and Fairy 6 is quite visually messy, especially at first, because you'll be loading up all these actions and then you'll be trying to execute them, or you will be executing them, and then your character will go ballistic on screen, but it doesn't look like he's doing anything, he or she is doing anything. It doesn't look like there's any damage being done, but then it'll show you the health bar of the opponent and it would have dropped down a bit. So it's very abstracted, it's not unfair, it's not broken, and I never felt like I was being cheated while I was playing this game, but it's just very messy, and that'll put a lot of people off, especially people who are used to, like I said, that more tactile, immediate, or realistic feedback through combat. Another issue that this game has is that it has a terrible frame rate. Despite being quite a simple looking game, the frame rate absolutely stutters whenever something's loading in, and you would have just seen it just then. Whenever a battle scene loads, it just stutters a little bit, and this has been played on a PlayStation 4 Pro, so it's not the console that's the problem. It's definitely the engine is just, it's a poorly optimized one. And that's a little bit disappointing because the actual art direction is quite nice. Again, it's simple. It looks like a generation old game, but the art direction is really nice, but then you just have that immersion broken every so often because it just takes that second or two to load things in, which is disappointing. But for me, the thing that was probably the biggest issue was the difficulty spikes. This game has a very decidedly old school approach to difficulty, where I was absolutely cruising through common enemies, having no problem fighting them whatsoever. But then I get to a boss and be absolutely creamed by the boss. And I would fight every enemy along the way. So I would make sure that I wasn't missing enemies, and if you do that with a modern JRPG, you kind of expect that means that your team will be leveled up to the point that they need to be for whatever boss is coming up next. Unfortunately, with Sword and Fairy 6, that's not enough, and you do need to go back and you need to do a lot of grinding, especially on the normal difficulty levels or higher. And I haven't played a game like that for quite a while, and unfortunately, that difficulty system actually ruined the game the first time I tried it. So I was about 9 hours through 10 hours. I was about 10 hours through the game, and I got up to a boss fight, which there was just no way I was going to be able to beat the boss. I was not anywhere near leveled enough for that particular boss, even though, like I said, I was actually cruising through the common enemies leading up to that boss. So I thought, okay, I need to go and grind a bit when I restarted. Unfortunately, because of the story at the time, there was a sense of urgency. You needed to go and fight this boss immediately to save the life of one of your characters. And that meant that you were locked off going back to fight any enemies. There was no way to actually get additional experience points, which meant that 10 hours in, the only option I had was to actually restart the game. There's no way to change difficulty settings mid-game. And this is actually the boss fight. I could not beat this boss the first time I got up to her when I was playing. So it was really frustrating to have to restart a game. I haven't had to do that with a JRPG for the longest time. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, I acknowledge that this game is not made very well at all. It's ambitious. It's very ambitious, well and truly beyond I guess the talents of the development studio. But there is a reason that Sword and Fairy is so popular in China, and a game like this, despite all its flaws, is really popular, and that is because it is a particularly good example of storytelling in RPGs. And if you can put aside the issues that you will have with playing it, I really do think that you will find that this one is oddly mesmerizing. You'll start playing and you won't particularly get it. You'll almost put the controller down and walk away. But as you play on, you'll start to realize that, hang on, there is something in here, and it is something really appealing, and then you'll be hooked, and before you know it, you'll be restarting because you've run into a boss that you can't beat. But I'm not going to be too bitter about it. I did go back and finish it, and it's fine once you know what you need to do. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this video. I hope that it's been of interest. It is a different game, and it's very niche, but I actually do think that I would recommend this to most people. Thanks very much for watching, and we will see you at the next video.